I, like most people, buy my tea bags from the supermarket. I make a cup of tea and don't think too much of it. I know historically that tea came from India and China, but I didn't know that more recently, within the last 120 years or so, that tea was introduced to East Africa, Kenya, and in particular, Uganda. So I'm going to take a trip out this morning to a plantation that's not far from me. So why don't you come along for the ride? Time's just before 9 o'clock and I'm heading out with full sun at about 24 degrees, a little bit later than I normally leave on my Sunday morning trips. But we're going to take a left now onto the Entebbe Kampala road. On the right is Lake Victoria, and we're heading towards Baita. Whenever I'm riding, I always like to look out for the most unusual thing carried on a body bottom, and today's winner has been my best catch on camera so far. But don't worry, they seem quite relaxed and enjoying the ride. I have to make an apology for the fact that Entebbe is in fact on a peninsula, and it would appear that I seem to be showing you the same roads all the time. Unfortunately, there are only two ways out of Entebbe towards Kampala. One is the express highway, which I'm not allowed to ride because you have to have an engine more than 400cc, or this road here, which is the Kampala to Entebbe road. There is a short 20-minute car ferry ride from an area in Entebbe called Nakigalala, which takes you across a small part of Lake Victoria, but I would very rarely use that. There are several things in Uganda which take a little bit of getting used to. The first one is the matatus. Never go too close, never travel too much on the left if you can. You just never know when they're going to pull in or pull out. Sometimes they indicate, sometimes they don't. And secondly, the boda boda riders who just need to go 20 yards up the road will often ride on the wrong side towards you, and you always have to be on the lookout for those. seems to be an accepted practice for motorbikes, bicycles and pedestrians to share this left-hand side of the road, and undertaking seems to be okay, but I make myself aware all the time of the dangers of this practice. And the runner-up of my unusual things carried on a boda goes to this guy here who's carrying a petrol strimmer. I've now arrived at Kajansi, which is where our adventure really starts. We're heading down to the big roundabout and flyover just ahead of us now. And then we're going to head off towards the hills and the tea plantation area. Leaving the tarmac roads now for a while and entering a marsh area, you can see on the left the market garden centres which are thriving in this area. So, with the express highway carefully making its way above us, and the Manyonyo slip road fenced off to our left, we make our way through on the Marram tracks through to the tea plantation. We haven't had rain in Uganda for quite some time now, and as you can tell the Marram tracks are very dusty. I've got my visor down, and the side of the road on the verges are full of brown soil. So after a ride of about 30 to 40 minutes, I finally arrive at the Nakigalala Tea Plantation. The tea plantation itself is on two sides of a hill overlooking the Kajansi area. The land itself is owned by the Kabaka of Buganda and is leased to the current tea plantation owner. The idea of growing tea was a British one, and the idea to grow tea in East Africa, based on the fact that it was a very similar climate to India, was taken on board, and seeds were cultivated at the Royal Botanical Gardens at Kew in London. The cultivation of the young seedlings was then transferred to the Botanical Gardens in Entebbe for further development, and by the early 1920s, it had become a successful commercial venture. Uganda now produces 50 million kilograms of tea every year, which is now exported to Mombasa for sorting and selling around the world, as well as for the local market. Although the number of tea plantations in Uganda is unknown, there are 35 factories in the country employing over 80,000 people in the industry. So that was just a small part of the plantation. I was beginning to get a little bit lost, so decided to regroup under the express highway, check my Google Maps, as I wanted to go back to my favourite cafe for a cup of tea to celebrate my trip this morning. So rather than return to the road I came in on, I decided to take this new track up to the Wankalakuku road. Not one I've used before, and the camera doesn't really do it justice, but later on the road does tend to get a little bit steep. I'm certainly not going to assume that there's room for both of us up this track. Finally back on the tarmac roads again, I ride through Saguku under the Kabaka's gate, turning left onto Kampala Road and heading towards the area of Lubowa. So as I make my way home and contemplate on my ride this morning, I'd like to thank you for joining me. If you've enjoyed the video, why not press subscribe and like, and I look forward to seeing you as I continue on my Brass Birdie adventures. Thanks for watching.